Very interesting listening to your anecdotes and the way you handle therapy. So thank you. Now we'll be moving on to the 10th session, but that session will be chaired by Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam, could you please take over?
Yes, I will. Mahika, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job today, and we really appreciate your work and helping us out.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'm going to be the chair for the next 4 sessions. Our next speaker is Adriana Vlaicu, and Adriana Vlaicu has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics. She has worked as a business analyst for about 6 years, after which she decided to change her field to philosophy. At present, Adriana also holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy and last year graduated from the Philosophical Counseling and Consultancy Master's Program at West University of, I'm not sure I'll say it right, Timisoara. Ms. Vlaicu is currently enrolled in the PhD program at the same university, also in the field of philosophy, with the theme of alienation, technology, and higher education.
Thank you. Okay, do you see my presentation? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see, but you'll have to speak up a little.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to say that I'm very nervous. This is my first ever presentation on a conference. And then that my presentation is a lot more theoretical than what has been presented so far. And it relates to the traits a philosophical counselor should have in the relationship with the client. So first, I'm going to start by mentioning that even though it has deep roots in ancient philosophy, philosophical counseling is still a rather new practice that has emerged only 40 years ago. And as with all new practices, philosophical counseling is also faced with debates when it comes to its methods and techniques, as well as the traits that are essential for the philosophical counselor in the client-counselor relationship. As I already mentioned in this presentation, the main focus will revolve around the traits that are considered essential for the philosophical counselor, specifically whether unconditional positive regard should be taken into account as one of them or not. Our thesis is that, at least in the case of alienation, the philosophical counselor should also grant the client unconditional positive regard. But first, let us begin by trying to better understand what the practice of philosophical counseling consists of. As it was defined by Ran Lahaf in 1996 as an approach for addressing the dilemmas, predicaments, and life issues of the person in the street philosophical self-examination, philosophical counseling methods and techniques are widely varied from philosophical counselor to another. This wide variety of methods and techniques, Lahaf believes is caused by a lack of fundamental paradigm from which philosophical counseling could have started its development, a lack of a Freud-like figure. In spite of all this variety, he managed to identify 2 distinct approaches. The more common one that is termed the critical thinking approach, and its alternative that is called the edification approach. The critical thinking approach, as its name implies, employs a set of critical thinking tools and techniques in order to critically investigate the client's issues, beliefs, and behavior. It usually focuses on trying to find a solution to specific problems presented by the client through the means of critical thinking. On the other hand, the alternative approach, termed the edification approach, is more concerned with the ideas and theories that can be found in traditional philosophy rather than with the critical thinking tools and skills that were employed in their development. Lahaf thinks that in this approach, philosophical counseling is an ongoing process the client goes through in his quest for meaning and wisdom. The goal of this never-ending process is to enrich rather than simplify the counselor's world, to problematize rather than resolve their personal problems. Having all of the above in mind, one has to wonder what are the essential traits that the philosophical counselor should possess in order to be able to meet the needs of the client, as well as to establish a therapeutic relationship with the client. Apart from the obvious knowledge of theoretical theories and analytical thinking tools, Roger Patton believes that Carl Sagan's perspective on the client-therapist relationship he developed in his client-centered therapeutic approach would fit and benefit the philosophical counselor as well. Rogers thought that the counselor must possess three core traits in order to be able to establish a relationship with the client that can be conducive to growth and personal development. These are congruence, genuineness or realness, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding. In fact, he firmly stated that these three characteristics are not limited to the counseling or therapeutic relationship, but that they apply whether we are speaking of the relationship between therapist and client, parent and child, leader and group, teacher and student, administrator and staff, in fact, in any situation in which the development of the person is a goal. Congruence refers to the counselor capacity to display realness and authenticity in the relationship with the client. Unconditional positive regard is explained by Rogers through synonyms such as acceptance, caring, or prizing, and is seen as a non-conditioned and non-possessive acceptance of the client as a person. It is described as an attitude of I'll accept you as you are rather than one of I'll accept you when. This attitude is directly proportional with the prospect of constructive change on the part of the client. Empathic understanding is described as a deep and subjective understanding of the client with the client. Going back to Patton's perspective on the philosophical counselor essential traits, he mentioned that the supportive, non-threatening relationship that would result by using Rogers' suggestion would be a good match when it comes to philosophical counseling as well. But further on, he dismissed the granting of unconditional positive regard to the client on the grounds that this would be incompatible with the nature of philosophical counseling. He poses that when it comes to philosophical counseling, some modification must be made to Rogers' approach concerning the granting of unconditional positive regard. In his view, the client should still benefit from emotional support from the philosophical counselor, but he is to be granted respect only if he adopts a rational attitude. He describes this rational attitude as that of a being who must necessarily make claims about the world, understand that those claims must be true or false, and value truth. He believes that if the client fails in adopting this rational attitude, then he should be helped to do so. And if he cannot or does not want to adopt this attitude, then he or she will not be able to benefit from philosophical counseling and should be referred to other types of counselors. Patton's conclusion is that what the counselor should grant the client instead of unconditional positive regard is an attitude of Kantian respect tempered by a Rogerian warmth. While we are in complete agreement with the proposal to adopt Rogers' view on the client-therapist relationship, we believe that unconditional positive regard is essential to counseling, and excluding it would not benefit the counseling relationship. But before bringing our arguments in favor of this perspective, let us take first a closer look at what is understood by unconditional positive regard and the implications that have been identified in practice and are linked with the granting of unconditional positive regard by counselors to their clients. In his article, Unconditional Positive Regard Reconsidered, Paul Wilkins gives a great account on the meaning and implications of unconditional positive regard in practice. His idea of reversing each of the elements of unconditional positive regard can help us have a better grip on its significance. Wilkins identified and described three reverse tenses: conditional positive regard, unconditional negative regard, and unconditional positive disregard. He talks about conditional positive regard in terms of offering warmth, respect, or acceptance only under certain circumstances, when the other person has met some expectations we have laid on them or has fulfilled some requirements we have requested of them. He describes this attitude as one of I will only approve of, like or favor you, if you do this, give me this, or act in this way. Unconditional negative regard, on the other hand, is in Wilkins' view an attitude that transmits to the other whatever you say or do, whoever you are, I will hate, despise, demean, or denigrate you. He believes that unconditional negative regard can be found at the root of discriminatory attitudes like racism or sexism. The worst one, though, seems unconditional positive disregard that depicts an attitude of total indifference towards the other person, an attitude of refusal of any type of relationship with the other person, no matter their behavior, their actions, or their words. The extreme form of this attitude, Wilkins believes, is a total negation of the other person that can be so powerful that receivers of it come to doubt their right to life. Having all of this in view, we cannot help but to observe that neither attitude would suit or benefit the philosophical counseling relationship better than unconditional positive regard. The last two, unconditional negative regard and unconditional positive disregard, would most definitely have a negative impact, while conditional positive regard even though not as rejecting as the other two, still implies that the client has to meet certain criteria or to meet certain expectations that the philosophical counselor has imposed on them. Going back to Payden's view on unconditional positive regard and analyzing it through the lens that Wilkins has provided us with, we are bound to notice that Payden's modification upon unconditional positive regard resembles one of these reverse stances, namely conditional positive regard. By constraining the client into adopting a rational attitude, the counselor is adopting a stance where he only favors some patterns of thought that are viewed as positive, while refusing to deal with the negatives ones. Wilkins believes this leads to a neglect of the totality of the client's being, which is likely to be a block to therapeutic change and may be damaging. He also mentions that this sort of attitude from the philosophical counselor towards the client might point to the counselor pursuing a different agenda than that of the client, and thus seeking to reward only appropriate behavior. Before going further on and analyzing Payden's view from the perspective of alienation, there are two more counter-arguments that need to be addressed. First of them is related to Payden's definition of a rational attitude as that of a being who must necessarily make claims about the world, understand that those claims might be true or false, and value truth. To begin with, he seems to be talking from a classical logic standpoint only by restricting the truth values of claims to a Boolean domain, while in reality, we might have to deal with probable or possible scenarios presented by the client. Also, he talks about the client valuing truth, but which of the main truth theories to be taken into account in this valuing of the truth? Should the client value only truth according to correspondence to facts? Should he weigh it against its coherence with the rest of his belief systems? Or should he consider this truth from a minimalist, pragmatic, or rather constructivist perspective? Another point that must be mentioned is stressed out by Wilkins and is related to a person's right to choose, not to change, to be cured, or to grow. He believes that it comes naturally for the counselor to seek the development or growth of the client, to the extent he might even form a vision of what change might lead to. But as Wilkins points out, for some clients, it is only when the counselor gives up the desire to instill change within the client that the change actually starts to take place. Further on, we'll analyze this perspective on unconditional positive regard more in depth from the perspective of alienation, starting with a brief depiction of what this concept stands for. This phenomenon of alienation has been linked with different meanings throughout the history of philosophical thought. Our current understanding of this concept has started being developed during the 17th century, especially in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's writing. Rousseau talks about an idealistic natural state of the human being where humans lived in a state of peace and harmony. He believed that life in society, by instilling a sense of competition and constant comparison, is what generates the state of war humans are waging against each other. In the meantime, there have been associated a lot of distant meanings with the concept of alienation. We can talk about alienation from work, from others, from nature, self-alienation, social isolation, cultural estrangement, and the list can go on. But one thing is common to all these distinct meanings and types of alienation, that is the idea of separation, of isolation from someone or something. Whether we are talking about alienation from nature, from fellow human beings, or even from his own self, the alienated individual feels excluded from, unaccepted by a certain type of experience, Going back to our thesis, namely that at least in the case of alienation, the philosophical counselor should grant the client unconditional positive regard, we will bring as supporting arguments 3 distinct viewpoints. First, Carl Rogers' own ideas, then Ron Lahav's perspective on philosophical counseling as connecting philosophical discourse and everyday life through his transformational philosophy's approach, and the perspective developed in the area of community philosophy. We will start by analyzing Carl Rogers' ideas on counseling a client that is dealing with alienation. He believed that the key to alleviating the feelings of alienation the client might go through is empathy, as it helps the client reconnect as being part of humanity. But the way he described this empathic understanding of the client is clearly deeply connected with the granting of unconditional positive regard also. He clearly stated that the highest expression of empathy is accepting and non-judgmental. He believed this to be true in light of the impossibility one faces in accurately perceiving the inner world of another when they have already formed an evaluative opinion of that person. Moreover, he mentioned that this impossibility in accurately perceiving the inner world of another person is also rooted in the valuing or caring for that person and their inner world. Rogers believed that the granting of what he termed true empathy described in his own words as being always free of any evaluative or diagnostic quality, is what helps the client in the process of self-acceptance. He also clearly points out that even though when a client is experiencing hurt, confusion, anxiety, or alienation, the granting of empathic understanding by the counselor is invaluable in helping the client overcome these experiences, but the counselor must also possess the other two attitudes. Wilkins also noticed the fine line that separates in practice unconditional positive regard and deep empathy. Examining Payden's suggestion under this viewpoint, we are left wondering what impact would have his proposal of modifying Rogers's unconditional positive regard on the granting of empathic understanding, since the two seem so closely interrelated. Our next supporting argument comes from Rand Lahav's transformational philosophies approach, which is part of the edification approach group. Lahav based this approach on what he coined as perimeter and worldview. He defined the perimeter as being a kind of personal prison, analogous to Plato's cave, and he believes that this perimeter is kept in place by psychological mechanisms and forces that we are accustomed with and thus are rarely aware of. What is characteristic of this perimeter is that it has a specific inner logic, and it expresses the person's particular way of interpreting and understanding life. A person's perimeter is an expression of their view of the world, themselves, or others that is rarely conscious, and that can even at times be in contradiction with the conscious perspective that person might express verbally. The worldview of a person, it's his philosophy of life that is implicit and is usually not expressed through words, but is rather an understanding of life which is expressed in the person's habitual patterns. Lahav gives a great example in the case of Laura, a client that has reached out to a philosophical counselor due to feeling alienated from her workplace, her colleagues, her career, and even her friends. Using this approach of transformational philosophy, the first task the philosophical counselor has is to examine everyday situations and identify central behavior and emotional patterns in order to explore the client's perimeter and form a perspective on their worldview. In Laura's case, the philosophical counselor, by exploring this perimeter, identified Laura's worldview and thus the root cause of her alienation in her lack of inner life she was experiencing, and the constant need to fill this lack with the experiences of others. But the second step is the most relevant for our thesis, as this is where the identification approaches that have as goal the development and enrichment of the client's life, the philosophical counselor, by accepting the worldview of the client and working within that worldview, seeks to inspire and awaken some voices that already are living inside the client, but that are usually drowned by everyday concerns. Looking at Payden's proposal through this lens, it seems to us that when making his proposal, he is interpreting philosophical counseling more from a critical thinking approach that is concerned with solving the immediate problem of the client and not really taking into consideration the perspective of the edification approach, which is more concerned with helping the client's worldview develop and grow. As Rogers believed that in order to instill growth in the client, the counselor should possess all three traits. At least from an identification approach, we believe that the philosophical counselor should also take into account unconditional positive regard as a quality to display towards the client. And the third and last argument we bring in support of our thesis are the perspectives developed in the area of community philosophy. This practice is deeply rooted in philosophy for children that was developed in the 1970s by Professor Matthew Lipman, a practice that has managed to prove that even young children can think rationally and abstractly, and that they can benefit from philosophical engagement. The fundamental tool community philosophy is employing, as in the case of P4C, the community of philosophical inquiry. What is specific to this type of approach is that the philosophical counselor, a facilitator of the group, is supposed to only guide the discussion without issuing any value judgments on the arguments brought on by the participant. This type of approach could prove extremely beneficial in the case of alienation, as the community of inquiry could serve both as a place where the individual could reconnect as being part of a group and feel accepted through the non-judgmental attitude of the philosophical counselor, and a place where he could explore and understand his feelings of alienation with the help of the facilitator and of the group. We will bring our own example in support of this claim by illustrating the proceedings in the case of a community of inquiry built around the theme regarding the connection between technology and alienation. The stimulus used for this community of inquiry will be a short YouTube video depicting the dangers of social media alienation, called simply Social Media Alienation Short Movie. The philosophical counselor, acting as a facilitator, will first give a brief introduction to the group on what the concept of alienation stands for and what has been said by different philosophers about the link between technology and the phenomenon of alienation. After presenting the stimulus by playing the video for the group of participants, the role of the philosophical counselor will be solely to guide the discussion using questions such as, is technology a source of alienation? Do you feel alienated due to the intrusion of technology and social media? Could alienation be a natural process as part of our evolution as human beings? What effects does alienation have on people's needs? What needs are no longer satisfied? Is contemporary society alienated by the intrusion of technology and social media, as the video seems to suggest? Which members of society are the ones that are most affected by the phenomenon of alienation? Which is the danger posed by alienation? How will alienation evolve in the future? And in conclusion, in light of these arguments, we conclude that at least in the case of alienation, as the client is experiencing feelings of disconnectedness, isolation, or estrangement, the philosophical counselor should also grant the client an attitude of acceptance and caring through unconditional positive regard. We believe this aspect is important, as since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, numerous studies have reported an increase in the symptoms associated with alienation, such as depression, anxiety, insomnia, stress, or social isolation. So a lot of the clients that will be addressing philosophical counseling offices in the near future will be dealing with issues caused by this phenomenon. Thus, it is important for the philosophical counselor to be aware of the necessities this type of client requires and the relationship he must build with him in order to help in alleviating the state of alienation. In the end, we believe that both practices on philosophical counsel, both approaches on philosophical counseling would benefit from the philosophical counselor adopting an attitude of unconditional positive regard, as we consider this attitude is concerned not with accepting the irrationalities themselves, but with accepting the client as a human being that might sometimes harbor irrational thoughts, and to help them overcome these irrationalities by using the tools, methods, and ideas that have been developed in philosophical counseling and in philosophy itself. And this was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. That was a great presentation. At this point now, we'll open up the discussion for questions and comments. If you have a question, please type question in the chat box. Marie Tillmans.
Yeah, hi. I thought that was very interesting. And as far as, and tell me if I got this right, that you're doing a couple of things at the same time. So it almost feels like the unconditional positive regard is like the undercurrent, which allows the client to, or children, if you're doing philosophy with children, to feel safe. It's a safe environment. And from that point, you can then sort of ask more critical thinking questions or confrontative questions, but the underlying current has to be maintained so that the person doesn't feel either attacked or further alienated or, you know, even doubted in their own, let's say, humanity. So are you, it seems like you're doing multiple things at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes, but what do you mean by multiple things at the same time?
Well, what I tried to just say, that you, the unconditional positive regard is like an undercurrent so that the person feels safe. And then from that place, you can also apply other methods or modes of questioning, maybe even forms of confrontation, but always keeping in mind that the person continues to feel safe. So they don't throw up defenses or feel further alienated, or they have to explain themselves. So that's what I mean by multiple things. You're working on different levels with that human being.
Yeah, that was the main idea, to have an atmosphere where the client feels accepted, so we can then use all the tools and all the ideas that philosophy and philosophical counseling put at our disposal. Because if we make the client feel rejected, then as you mentioned, then he just shuts up, and there is no work to be done if he shuts
Right.
up.
And I think it's just quickly in my own work also with doing philosophy for children. One way children are not so attached to their ideas, so they can change their mind quickly and so forth, but they do need to feel safe. And one way I do that too is if they mention something that is not immediately clear to me or the group, I'll ask others in the group, can you explain, do you understand what Susie just said? And can you verify, or can you explain it in your words? And then so that way the person or the child continues to feel that what they say matters. After that, you can question the idea, and then it's sort of an idea that floats around in the group, but it has to be anchored in the child or the person that they feel their idea is accepted.
Yes, this was what I was trying to create with the example of community of inquiry that I gave, but only for adults, but the same attitude that we have to accept the ideas, and then we can confront them, see if they are rational or they are irrational,
Right.
how we could change them.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
We can't hear you, Sam.
Sorry about that. Our next question is from Andrei Nutas. I hope I said your name correctly.
Yeah, it's correct. Thank you.
Okay,
So, Adriana, my question is, because the unconditional positive regard seems to be in a bit of a tension with confronting the client, the way I'm seeing it. Because the moment you're confronting him, you're also stating some things, like, for example, if you're confronting a statement that they have made, which is logically inaccurate, and if it has certain fallacies, or if you're trying to showcase that there are certain presuppositions that they are not taking into account in the moment that they engage into the conversation or just avoiding them, you are somehow pushing back on this unconditional positive regard. You're telling him in a way that, well, we accept you and everything is fine, but there's a small asterisk, there's a but there. So how can you deal with unconditional positive regard while combining it with sporadic needs of confrontation with the client?
I do believe that confrontation is needed, but I don't believe that it is in opposition with unconditional positive regard. I think that if you create an attitude of acceptance from the very beginning, then you can work with the client to have him accept his own faults in reasoning and help them overcome them by this. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm trying to explain.
Well, that's kind of what I said too, right?
Yeah.
That's where you're working on multiple levels. They don't contradict each other. You're doing it all at the same time.
Yeah, but you have
Is there tension there that emerges?
No, not really. Not in my experience. Not with clients or with children. But again, they have to be anchored in something that feels safe. And so if they're not completely safe, there will be tension.
For me, it's just theory. So thank you, Maria, for giving the practice perspective.
I was thinking while asking this about some philosophical workshops in which I participated that were a bit more strongly based on confronting people, and where there was an appearance, at least, of this unconditional positive regard, but maybe it was not enough for the client to really feel it, and so that they would feel safe.
Right, and they will let you know. You can feel very quickly if you're tuned in. Whether the client, sorry to take over here, the client will disconnect. The client will no longer participate in the same way, doesn't feel engaged. So it's for the philosophical counselor to hold, to be aware, is the person or the child still engaged? Are they still connected? And if that starts to slip, then you have to bring that back in some way. because sometimes people get very carried away with the ideas, certainly PhDs, and then they lose the client in the process. And that's, I think, where a lot of people go wrong, who don't have the attunement to what, the unconditional regard that has to be there before you can do anything else. Kids too, they will instantly disconnect. They become unruly, they sit around, they're not. But if they know that they matter, you don't have to control the group. They're there.
All right.
That's my experience.
All right. Next comment is from Elliot Cohen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the concept of unconditional positive regard, as well as empathy and congruence, are important contributions to psychotherapy in general. And it shows us really how psychotherapy can influence in a positive way philosophical counseling and the interdependence between those two things. In logic-based therapy, the first step of it is largely unconditional positive regard, letting the individual own their own thinking. In order to know what they're thinking, you have to accept them and allow them to express their views and own them. And at the end of the day, that's really what you want them to do. So
exactly.
It's very important, and I think I applaud you for doing a paper on unconditional positive regard in the context of philosophical counseling. It's extremely important. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We have a comment from Anka, who writes, a client who says, here is a bubble of unconditional positive regard, but not outside of here. There I get disregard and conditional positive regard. So how can I deal with those? How would you intervene with such a client?
It's a very good question.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course, if only the counselor gives this unconditional positive regard, then yes, it would be like a bubble for the client. But from Roger's perspective, at least I cannot speak from practice because I haven't gotten to real practice yet. But from what I understood, if we give this unconditional positive regard, then the client himself gets to a point where he accepts himself, and this regard and the conditional positive regard from outside won't matter that much because the client will be in touch with himself. He'll be accepting himself.
Yeah. But that's a slow process.
Of course. Unfortunately, yes, very slow process.
All right. Do we have any more comments or questions for Adriana? Okay, we have one from Evan and one from Ivan. Evan, would you have the floor.
Sorry, I was struggling with buttons. So this is just a comment that might be adjacent to the research that you're doing, because I'm new to logic-based therapy, philosophical practice also, but I have to say that a lot of the emphasis on unconditional positive regard really seems to run on a parallel track to a lot of research that has been done in diversity, inclusion, and equity in pedagogy. So how do you make students in, let's say, a philosophy classroom feel like they can speak fearlessly? Because if the arguments are problematic, as a teacher, you're going to try to critique. You're not just going to let it go, but you have to practice in such a way that you do not make the student feel like they're unwelcome or that they're not in a safe place to speak freely. So it's just a comment and a suggestion that it might help in some of your research to look at some of the pedagogical research that's been done on this. And as a sort of broader thing to think about for all of us, I mean, I'm really struck by the possible relationship that good teaching has to good counseling.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Ivan?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Adriana, for your presentation. This is a question for you, but also for Maria, about the question of attunement. I mean, and so, I definitely agree with, that you have to be attuned, right? I mean, and so to a person, so they, so they don't disconnect, they don't feel engaged, they don't feel safe anymore. Any advice that you can give about some of the ways, maybe 2 or 3 ways to kind of, secure that attunement and maintain that attunement, because it's quite difficult sometimes, especially like you say, someone like me who I have an idea and then I want to make them, and so that kind of attunement. Any practical advice on practicing attunement? Right? I mean, and so.
Well, if I can jump in again, it's
please.
all the things you do around it. So in the classroom, for instance, before you have your sessions, you say hi to the kids, you give them warm hugs. This is also my work in elementary school. You ask them about your work, their work. So you start engaging them at a very, initially in a very, you're not just focused on, we're going to do philosophy now. And so with clients, do you want a cup of tea? It's raining outside. What a miserable day. Or, I mean, you have to engage in small ways first to get some kind. I mean, it's just like in the Middle East where you bargain for goods. You have to establish some kind of relationship with the person you're bargaining with. And then it can get more intense, and then you're going to talk about prices. But first you sit down and you have tea and you talk about everything else first. So you have to establish some kind of relationship with the client or the children first before you can start working on anything else, I think. But maybe Anka wants to jump in, because I think she has a lot of experience with this too.
I agree with you, Maria, on that one. I think, in fact, there is a metaphorical dimension to the situation of consultation. That is, when the person comes in and does this performative thing called consulting together, it means something to them. If they find it as a threat, or if they find it like being told off, you're not thinking properly, it's a whole different thing. So we need to get to know the clients and their worldview and a bit of their sensitivities, let's say. But we can as well look at how they introduce themselves. There are people who make a lot of introduction. There are people who speak to reveal themselves, people who speak to hide themselves. And yeah, we can make observations and keep them in mind for later. But in the first, I agreed that we need to establish contact and make a safe environment. Otherwise, it will not work. They will just defend from us like we're some enemy.
So it's informal, a lot of informal work before you start formal work.
Yes, and in psychotherapy, we can also do this formally, like we can have contracts with the clients telling them what is about to happen, how we are going to question them, and we don't want them to feel threatened by it, but sort of enjoy the process. And if they don't enjoy it anymore, they should let us know so we can slow it down. So it's collaborative, what we do, and we agree to it every step so that they can let us know and guide us when it's been too much or when it's time for a break or for something else.
I think also one thing with my experience with a client, that they feel definitely in children too empowered. So when the client and I, when I had my practice in Holland, at some point we were philosophizing about a dream, and I would say, is this what it means? I just threw that up. What do I know? And I'm not a dream therapist, so I'm not pretending to be. And she said, no, Maria, you got that all wrong. I said, okay, so they have the power to tell me I'm wrong. The child in the philosophy discussion group says, no, Maria, I don't know, Miss Maria, I don't agree with you. That's wrong. So then they also feel empowered because I'm not being the expert.
It is interesting. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening, and so And I'm glad you mentioned the concept of empowerment, because it's one of the behavioral virtues, so instead of manipulating someone, you empower them, right? And you're supposed to, as a philosophical counselor, LBT practitioner, you're supposed to embody those virtues, right? I mean, and so there is a very strong connection there between unconditional positive regard and the active listening and empathy that goes with it, the congruency, and that you guys are mentioning here, and the virtue of empowerment. But you gave me very nice, concrete ways that I can move forward. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for one more question, and it's from Ashfat.
Thank you, sir. My question is a bit off topic. We might be digressing with this. I'll just ask in any case. You touched upon, thank you for your presentation, though it was very nice. And you touched upon the technology aspect and alienation in your second last slide, I guess. My concern is regarding the coming of virtual reality and the metaverse, and how that is likely to overtake a lot of lives in the coming 10 years or so. Will the aspect and the conceptualization of alienation change in some way? And will we have to deal with those problems? Do we need to learn how to deal with those problems now, or will they be dealt in the same way? It's an open question to everybody, not only to you in general. Thank you.
I think we should learn to deal with it as soon as possible, since this alienation thing has been a topic of philosophy for some years now, a lot of years actually.
Yeah.
So probably, and denying it will not solve anything. And technology seems to be worsening this thing. So as technology seems to be growing, alienation probably will also grow with it. I'm not against the growth of technology, but us just not looking at its negative aspects, I don't think is helping us with it. And I don't think it's a problem of technology itself, but I think it's mostly the problem of how we use technology that it's creating this phenomenon of alienation. The technology itself, it's not the problem.
No, I think the problem is trust and lack of it. But that's a whole other story. But that's where I think fundamentally where the issue is. And the social media either builds on trust or fabricated trust, or it's based on an initial distrust. So I think trust is at the bottom of it.
I'm also observing with this, sorry for jumping in like that. I'm also observing that as technology develops and everybody's individualism can be more readily expressed, we're also more likely to segment people. Like, you're, I don't know, 1% different from me, you're completely different from me. So we're also engaging, because we have the analytical and technological capacity to target the people that want to be around very precisely, and the cost of movement and space is getting more and more reduced, at least financial, I'm not talking now environmental. So this gives you apparent freedom, but at a big cost at the same time, is what I'm observing. So you're losing, you know, that spirit of community that you used to share in times where you had to go beyond, you know, those idiosyncrasies that everybody had, and still be able to congregate together and do things together due to technological limitations.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Adriana, again for that wonderful presentation. Thank you all for the questions. It's time now to move on to our next presenter. It's Andrei Nutas. His title is The Artificial Philosophical Counselor on the Possibility of Automating Philosophical Counseling. And Andrei, I have a very limited bio about you. You're a PhD student at West University, Timisoara in Romania. Would you like to add anything to your bio about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've studied philosophical counsel in the MA program together with Anka and Adriana here, and Aladin from yesterday. I've been involved in working with critical thinkings with groups. We also did a couple of experiments where we gather data to see the perception of people regarding their critical thinking capacity and how they actually are in real life and how they change even after, like a 2-week program based on Oscar Zbigniewia's model of philosophical counseling. And it was like a significant increase. The sample was small, but still it was an impressive result. And currently I'm working on ethical AI as my main subject in the PhD, which basically means I'm looking at natural language processors, under natural language AI in general, and looking, can they express ethical reasoning fundamentally? And I'm also working in the IT field in consulting, where I run a R&D group on AI testing. So we're trying to develop new methodology to test AI, and currently especially focusing on the capacity of AI to make ethical choices. So I will be sharing my screen. 1 second. Okay. Perfect. So my presentation is consolidated along 5 main points. First, I will give a brief overview about AI and GPT-3, a specific AI that I've used in the experiments. Then I will try to briefly define what is a philosophical counselor. And I will be analyzing what skills of the philosophical counselor existing AI models like GPT-3 can already automate, which skills can be automated by GPT-3 with a bit of fine tuning, which means just slightly modifying the existing AI model, and which would require a significant leap in performance, but I still believe are automatable in the future. So starting with the beginning, I think everybody has heard AI being tossed all over the place. Doesn't matter anymore if you work in technology or you're part of the general population, you have heard about AI at least once in your life. Within AI, we have different paradigms, and currently the dominant paradigm is that of machine learning. Machine learning is a type of AI where you use data and statistical techniques in order to improve the algorithm through experience, so to speak, with big quotation mark by experience, because we're just going through various rows of data fundamentally. So within machine learning, as can be seen here, we have 3 main categories. We have supervised learning, reinforcement learning, and unsupervised learning. So supervised learning means here's the data. This data can be categorized in a certain way. And now you can do a classification of the data, or you can make prediction using linear regression models or nonlinear regression models, etc. Unsupervised learning just takes the data and it clusters it alone. You don't need to do anything else to it. It just looks what data fits with what data based on statistical methods. What it can also do, it can reduce the dimension of data. So that means, let's say if you have a data set with 100 properties, it can reduce it to a data set with 10 properties. And reinforcement learning is basically you have an algorithm being put in an environment, and it goes through various states or situations in that environment, and then learns how to achieve a certain objective as it continuously fails, basically. And whenever it's faced with something similar, it will know based on experience how to act. So when it comes down to evaluating what sort of AI can likely automate the profession of philosophical counseling, I am mainly looking into natural language understanding and natural language generating type of AIs. The specific one that I'm using is from OpenAI, and it's called GPT-3. GPT-3 was trained using unsupervised deep learning. So this means that OpenAI basically took a big amount of data and tossed an algorithm at the data to see what happens out of it. By doing so, no human intervened in the learning process of the AI. Everything was done using multiple layers of neural networks. So this is so it can imitate as closely as possible the way that the brain naturally learns. That is the whole point of the deep learning methodology of machine learning. And here, for example, you can see an equation. This is fundamentally also how GPT-3 looks. At the end of the day, you have W, which is a weight, times X, which is a parameter, added up, and then comes a bias within the system. Seemingly, this can give birth to very human-like behavior, just this equation. Of course, the equation here only has 3 parameters and a bias. GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters. To get an idea of how big this is, it's basically about double the average expected number of neurons that the human brain has. And for the training data, it basically took almost all the data from the internet, and this would be equivalent to about, I don't know, 90 million books or 90 million, 250 pages long books. So it's just a lot. It's half the knowledge that humanity has written down in books since the beginning of time. Okay, now that we have an idea about what AI is and how GPT-3 is situated within this complex field of AI, we need to look at what philosophical counseling is and what the philosophical counselor does. So philosophical counseling consists of a trained philosopher helping an individual deal with a complex problem or an issue that is of concern to that individual. It can be when values conflict, it can be when a contradiction emerges, or when people have a reasoning problem, they just go in circles, or when something seems very meaningless in life and they're trying to regain their meaning. Philosophical counselors understand that most individuals lived by unexamined rather than unconscious assumptions and values that can affect thinking and behavior in puzzling or distressing ways. They also see a person's thinking as being informed by childhood experiences, but not determined by them. Through a series of dialogues, the philosophical counselor helps the client come to an awareness of hidden biases, unspoken assumptions, and conflicting values that are manifest within their mind. And they help the client inquire into ways of easing their problem. So we can observe that philosophical counseling is based also in part on the belief that a person's conundrum can be solved through philosophical means, or not in part, actually mainly on this belief. This belief relies on the fact that over the course of time, philosophers have pondered over many personal predicaments and revealed various biases, unspoken assumptions, and conflicting values, which, if brought to awareness, could help a client deal with their current situation. Hence, the philosophical counselor can be seen metaphorically as a guide, a mentor, a coach, who brings forth the inner philosopher that is present, but only slumbering currently within the client. In order to achieve this, the client is provided with philosophical thinking tools. So we're not going to give the client as philosophical counselors any ready-made recipes for the good life, or here is how you solve meaninglessness in 3 steps. Instead, we are going to help them gain an understanding about themselves and the world and their being within the world. So from this perspective, philosophizing is not the construction of general or abstract theories, but a unique expression of the individual's concrete way of being in the world. In Eckhart Ruschmann's view, the philosophical counselor helps the client become aware of the degree to which they experience mental constructs as facts. This means that people coming to a philosophical counseling session will believe that the world is in such and such way. And throughout the session, the client becomes aware by using philosophical thinking tools that much of this, such and such, is actually an image that they managed to stitch together in order to make sense of a world that is too complex for them to grasp in its factfulness, at the minimum, because of current epistemic constraints. So the client starts to see that they have what they have constructed within their minds, and they gain freedom to change these constructs which they before considered to be immutable truths. An example of this can be a client comes with a false dilemma, damned if I do, damned if I don't sort of scenario. And we engage to see if there really are only 2 options. We engage to see if really both options are catastrophic. And we basically dig deeper into finding out what is the reality which the client is confronted with, and how does he interpret it and construct it within their minds. So if we wrap everything up in something that an AI could deal with, I thought that the logical next step is, okay, let's make a job description for the philosophical counselor. And in Romania, we just have officially managed to get philosophical counselors be recognized as a profession by the state and managed through the Philosophical Counseling Association, which is currently run by philosophers from various universities within Romania, but led from here in Timișoara. And here are some of the things that we have added to the papers that we have had to send to the government in order to get accredited by the government as having an official job. So the philosophical counselor should have an MA or a PhD in philosophy. In certain other associations, I've seen that also become receiving a certificate from a board or an association can be enough so that the person can act as a philosophical counselor. So basically they need to have an accreditation of sorts. Generally, what I have seen is that it's about being able to express the thoughts of major philosophical thinkers, generally of European origins. But of course, it's really nice to have Indian and Chinese philosophy as well utilized. What I'm saying here is, of course, from a Romanian perspective. So if we look at it from other countries, European might change to Indian or to Chinese, and become a nice to have might become the European philosophers. Then it is about being able to utilize simple language to explain philosophical terminology and concepts, to be able to engage in a counseling-like communication, to know which type of problems philosophical counseling can be applied to detect presuppositions, logical fallacies, use logical analysis to walk the client through their thinking process, have the ability to reflect critically on philosophical theories, ability to contextualize everything to the client's situation, ability to propose sources with which the client can engage with, given the theme that you're currently discussing, and of course to understand the role of applied philosophy. Now, Other nice to have are about problem solving and decision making capacity, are about moderating workshops, working with children, working with people from underprivileged backgrounds, and having a knowledge of psychology. Going forward, the main points that I will address will be from the must-have category. So we are going to look now at skills that GPT-3 has already automated. So for example, be able to express the thoughts of major philosophical thinkers. What I'm showing you right now is a discussion that I've had with GPT-3, and I'm going to read through it. So, human, what is Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy? Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy is based on the idea of existentialism. He believes that humans are free and responsible for their own choices, and that human life is ultimately meaningless and absurd. Human, is that the central thesis of being and nothingness? AI, yes, the central thesis of Jean-Paul's Sartre's book, Being and Nothingness, is that humans are free and responsible for their own choices. What chapter best reflects his thesis? The thesis best reflected in chapter 1, Existence and Consciousness. In it, Sartre discusses the concept of consciousness and how it is central to human existence. Human, is consciousness what makes us free? Yes, consciousness is what makes us free. Sartre believes that consciousness allows us to make choices and be responsible for our own actions. Now, another one that we talked about, actually, let me first get here. So it's not just with regards to Sartre's philosophy, it can be regards to a variety of philosophies. If you try to engage with it and ask it what certain philosophers think, where can the main ideas be found, it will be able to give you an eloquent answer. It will also be able to give you an eloquent answer on who might you want to read, if not Sartre, to get a good idea about what Sartre wrote, or any other philosopher. So then it's about, can they utilize simple language to convey philosophical terminology and concepts? I took the Twin Earth experiment for this, which for me, it boggled my mind for a while to understand it. So I found it as a good example, given personal experience. Do you know the Twin Earth experiment? AI. Yes, I do. The Twin Earth experiment, thought experiment, is a thought experiment proposed by Hilary Putnam, in which he imagines a planet exactly like Earth, but with one critical difference: the chemical composition of water is different. On Earth, water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. On Twin Earth, the water is composed of two different atoms, XYZ and WXY. Human, what is the meaning behind this experiment? AI, the meaning behind the Twin Earth thought experiment is to highlight the importance of propositional content in determining the identity of things. What is propositional content? AI. Propositional content is the meaning of a sentence or a statement. Human, how does the experiment highlight the importance of the meaning of a sentence or statement in determining the identity of things? The experiment highlights the importance of propositional content in determining the identity of things by showing that the meaning of a statement can affect the identity of the thing the statement refers to. Can you further explain how it does this? The experiment shows that the meaning of a statement can affect the identity of the thing that the statement refers to by comparing two different planets, Earth and Twin Earth. On Earth, the water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen atom. On Twin Earth, the water is composed of XYZ and WXY. This is because the water in Twin Earth has different chemical composition. So it is still water. Yes, it is still water. The meaning of the statement, water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen atom, is what determines the identity of the water on Earth. However, on Twin Earth, the meaning of the statement, water is composed of XYZ and WXY atoms, is what determines the identity of water. I will stop with this example for now, and if needed, I can at any time get back to it. So I'm trying to go through all of the examples, and that's why some are longer and I will not go through the whole of it. So we could see here that the AI was able to summarize the thought experiment. It was able to address the questions in a direct manner, and it was able to do so in simple language, and to break down things whenever you had a question that required further definition. Okay. Then know the type of problems to which philosophical counseling can be applied. When I asked the question about what philosophical counseling can deal with, the AI said that it helps people to deal with existential problems. It also identified that it can deal with ethical or moral problems, and as well as with religious and spiritual problems. Of course, this doesn't, if you would continue asking it, it can generate multiple results. It also depends how you ask it, because depending on how you ask it, the answer can be different. And this is one of the problems that I will get to at the end when it comes down to working with the AI. Then, can it contextualize everything to the client's situation? So I took an example of what Aristotle would tell me if I want to become a better son. And the AI said, according to the philosopher Aristotle, becoming a better son is about fulfilling your natural potential and developing your virtues. To become a better son, you should focus on becoming a virtuous person, doing what is best for your family and community. Okay, this is quite vague, so I asked, what would that be? Doing what is best for them includes things like honoring your parents, being honest and trustworthy, being courageous and self-disciplined, and being generous and compassionate. So the AI managed to adapt Aristotle's teaching given my context. Then, does AI have the ability to give further sources, text to engage with, given a theme that we are discussing? So I asked if I want to better understand why there is evil in the world. The AI said that I should read the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And when I asked why would this fit, it says, I believe this book can help you better understand why there is evil in the world, because it dwells into the human psyche and explores the nature of good and evil. And this is also, again, a bit vague. So this happens quite often. You need to ask further questions, as some statements can be quite vague, but it does show that it can have a conversation. So I would say it's sufficient to say that it has already automated the task to a minimum level, a minimum required level. So then, in what way does it explore the nature of good and evil? The book examines whether evil is inherent in human nature, or if it is a product of society and upbringing. Then I suggested that it give me a philosophical book. It said Beyond Good and Evil from Nietzsche. Now here, what I discovered is that there might be a sensitivity problem, especially given that Beyond Good and Evil is a book in which Nietzsche has fairly severe sexist statements. And when I asked AI to insist quite a bit for the AI to put a warning sign, hey, this can be a good book, but if you might be bothered by this, I suggest you do not read it. Which I also think is important to announce, any sort of red flags when engaging with literature. Okay, so this is on what I consider that GPT-3 has already automated. Then there are certain things that I think GPT-3 could automate if we train it a bit more. And fine-tuning in GPT-3 is fairly easy. So for example, what what GPT-3 has achieved is called few-shot learning in AI terminology. That means that you have a predefined model that works fairly well and can adapt very well to most situations that it would find itself in. But it's not perfectly adapted to what you expect it to give you. So you can give it some examples. For example, if you want GPT-3 to translate something to German from English, you can say, I love you, and then tell it, I love you equals ich liebe dich. Well, you can say afterward another example. I have a lot of work, and you put an equal again, and you say, ich habe viel Arbeit. And after giving it 3 or 4 examples like this, you can just write, I don't know, I'm gonna go for a walk, and GPT-3 will know to translate what you said directly, and it will just give you the answer, ich gehe spazieren. And I believe that the same can be done with certain things, like the ability to detect presuppositions. For example, here GPT-3 answered correctly my opinion. So would you mind washing up the dishes this time? There are 4 choices. There are dishes that need to be washed up. I don't have time to do the dishes. The dishes needed to be washed up before. Someone then wash up the dishes the last time they needed to be washed up. So GPT-3 said, okay, it is 1 and 3. I can also concur that's 1 and 3. Dishes do need to be washed up, and the dishes needed to be washed up before the moment that this question was posed. Now, we come to a second example where the sentence is, I want more milk for my tea. The choices are, I hate tea with milk. I am having tea. Someone has already put milk in his or her tea. I do not like my tea with the amount of milk that is currently in the tea. The AI suggested the last one as the valid option. Personally, I think that the valid options are A, I am having tea because if there's milk in my tea, I am having it. And third, someone has already put milk in the tea of the person. That's also fairly obvious given the question. And here we find an example where GPT-3 have got the answer. Alex's wife has called. GPT-3 considered that Alex is married, to which I agree as a presupposition, but he also considered that Alex's wife has called the speaker. That is nowhere stated there. The fact that the speaker knows this doesn't mean that he was the person that was called. However, we can state that there exists a married woman. In this sense, a wife presupposes a married woman by definition. We have the same problems with logical fallacies. When it comes down to logical fallacies, I disagreed almost every time with the answers that GPT-3 gave me. I'm not sure which logical fallacies, and also with the previous example, to what degree it is the way I am asking the question that is problematic. But anyway, given that the way I'm asking the question seems to create significant challenges, I do not think it has the capacity that we could expect from a philosophical counselor currently, as we would want them to be more flexible and understanding how to deal with their clients. And then I also tested how could it engage in a counseling-like communication. So I asked it, okay, interact with me as a counselor. Just stating that out of the go did not suffice. That's why when I asked the next question, I had to prompt it, try to guide me using questioning wherever possible. As we can see here, it did engaged in developing my initial questions, helping me process it through follow-up questions. So why am I unmotivated? Why are you asking this question? Because Recently, I have been playing a lot of video games in my free time instead of learning or reading. Is there a reason why you would prefer to play video games instead of doing other activities? I play Dota 2, which has a ranking system. Every time I do something good, my score increases and I can instantly get rewarded. So you believe that potential rewards, the potential rewards the video game provide are more motivating to you than other activities? No, I believe that reading and learning will be in the long run more rewarding. So you feel that you would rather do something in the short term that may not be as rewarding in the long run than something that may be more rewarding in the long run. Yes. Can you think of a reason why you might feel this way? I keep saying that maybe I am tired, but I believe that this is wrong. I fundamentally think that I need a new vision of the future, vision where what I read and learn come together to make me more fulfilled. It sounds like you're looking for a long-term reward to be motivated by. Do you think that is something that is possible? Yes, but I don't know how to start going about it. Well, it sounds like you have a good idea of what you need to do. Maybe you can start finding someone who has had this type of success you are looking for and ask them how they did it. But the thing is, I don't see anybody around me who has the type of life that I would aspire to. Maybe you can look online for people and contact them and have them help you achieve your goal. So do you think I should get a coach? That may be a good idea. This is quite a good conversation that took place with AI, the one that I wrote here, but there are various conversations that did not go so smoothly. Also, while doing this conversation, there were a couple of times where I had to refresh the answer. Refreshing the answer says, give me the next possible answer fundamentally in order to generate something this fluently. So this is why I also think the capacity for this type of conversation out of the box can be generated with a bit of training. Now, what is training would presuppose?
Excuse me, Andrei, you have roughly 15 minutes left. 15
minutes? Okay. Yeah. I'm going to wrap it up. Oh, sorry. Did a small mistake here. Just give me a second. Okay. Now, where we end up with are some things that I think the AIs will be able to automate in future generations. So the ability to reflect critically on philosophical theories. I did not manage to get it to do that. I managed to get it to summarize it, I managed to get it to give me what other writers have thought about it, but it could not critically reflect. Like, it was lacking that spark of original thinking. Then I also tried many prompts and many ways of going about it. I could not get it to summarize, to walk me through my own thinking process. I did not manage to do that. We saw some glimpses of that within the counseling conversation, but it cannot do this systematically. Finally, it cannot bring everything together. So what Maria was saying before, philosophical counseling is a multi-layered approach. It's not just about doing one thing right at one time and then moving on to the next. It's about a holistic composition of things that need to happen simultaneously. What I do believe is that GPT is developing at a very high exponential rate, 1 order of magnitude every couple of years, and increased performance. And with each new generation, we are getting something that was incredible or impossible before. In the next generation, we're talking about 2 orders of magnitude jump. So it is almost impossible to know what capacities it will have, and we might not even be able to fully test this. As such, I believe that it is highly likely that within the 21st century, we will have AI that will meet or surpass human capability in fields that require the application of natural language. Okay, thank you for your attention, and we can go on into the Q&A.
Andrei, that's an amazing presentation. So let's see if we have questions. We have, let's see, Antonio has a comment.
Hey, thank you, first of all, for the presentation. I mean, it was brilliant. Seriously, I mean, there are lots of things amazing in this, but for working experience that I had and personal interest, I'm very into natural language processing and knowledge management. And I actually see some huge problems that still haven't neither been addressed in this way. And it's all related, first of all, to the backbone of the structure. So it's the data and I mean the way and the kind of rules that are linking this. Why humans, I mean, are able to draw inference and kind of reasoning, sometimes neither thinking about the kind of logic rule that they're following, but they got it, even if association and all. This is something that still devices lack. And even if we have powerful tools like neural networks, passwords, parsers, powerful reasoners, and all, the main problem is still that the systems are based on ontologies, first of all. So, I mean, systems to classify all the data and the kind of relationship. And this is one of the most famous, we could say, borrowing the IT got from philosophy. I mean, because ontology, first of all, is it's something I got born in philosophy. Leaving aside the problem of using and reusing some more domain-oriented ontologies, which is these are the more practical in many cases. Most ontologies do not contemplate ontologies written in this way.
Right.
Which was a concept that actually Derrida developed, and but still remained a little bit blurry. And it's the idea of the problem of the persistence. There are many cases where the systems, I mean, are not able to go beyond the kind of data they developed, and sometimes they cannot manage to change it in a dynamic way or to reason in such a way, I mean, to compare what was before, what is after, I mean, what remains from the past that has gone, but still affects the way of reasoning. And I think that we may have the right technology, as you were saying at the end. I mean, we're really growing exponentially in this way, but what we lack is the right knowledge modeling to develop the kind of system in order to go beyond this kind of complexity, because otherwise we may have some good interactions, but at the same time we may never have properly the full range of interactions that a human may have. At this stage, I think that most AI applications are just a wireless version of von Kempelen's Turk. There is still the human hand behind.
So I agree with most AI application having this sort of problem. But what's interesting, for example, in natural language AIs, the main question is exactly what you put. Do we need to teach it all these different ontologies? Do we need to make various modules for various ontologies? Well, I have interacted with GPT-3, for example, across various domains of knowledge. What's interesting, it is able to remember what you have talked with while it answers the question. It is able to deduce, for example, if I say there is a glass in the air, and we talked then about something else, and then I asked what happened to the glass while we were talking, and it said it would fall. It has fallen. So it understands that if there's a glass in the air, there is gravity, and gravity will pull the glass down. So what GPT-3 seems to have answered is the debate that has been dominant in the field of AI, namely, do we need to create all these different knowledge models, which is one approach, or can we just put more parameters to the problem? And it seems that more parameters inherently maintains knowledge. somehow. I have no idea how. It's not clear why all these parameters with weight can inherently maintain knowledge and transfer knowledge, but they do somehow.
I got it. Well, yeah, I mean, there may be, of course, in many areas, different development, but just a quick parenthesis, then I will let the others speak, of course. It's just, I put this question because, I mean, as I say, I had a previous experience. I worked like 2 years as process improvement for Alexa, as this was developing for the Italian market. And there were certain things that really, there were moments where you were asking to the device at the beginning when it was properly in testing, neither launched, do you know what time is it? And the device was answering yes. I mean, it wasn't able to understand the pragmatic difference in this case.
Yes.
That's that. In order to get it, I mean, they corrected, and of course, later the device got the right answer, but got the right answer not because it arrived to reason it. They got it because simply someone added in their architecture, added all the things, like to say, if someone is telling you this, it means tell me the time. That's the thing. It still lacks the kind of ability. This was what I meant.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Carol.
Carol, you're muted.
Okay. Your talk was certainly very timely and informative, really interesting. But I have a couple of questions about it as in terms of its use in psychotherapy, especially philosophical therapy. Now, could, or logical based therapy, even the use of logic is with human beings, we're still talking to each other as human beings. And I'd like to know, do you think that AI can detect either irony or humor? Or can it be ironic or humorous?
Yeah.
That like, and could AI appreciate, understand, say, Plato's Phaedrus or some of Wittgenstein's work?
So if it can appreciate or understand, I think that's a question that I don't know if I'm able to answer it. I can say that there's of course a difference between silicon-based existences and carbon-based existences.
Right.
So to what degree this difference is, we do not have the capacity to run the experiments to find it out. And just given the fact that it can mimic, you know, you end up with a zombie problem. If the AI discusses with you, because I had experiences with GPT-3 while testing it, it was funny, it was ironic, it was sarcastic. It manifested many human behaviors in its way of communicating. Now, would I say that the corpus that GPT-3 was trained on has irony and sarcasm, or would I say that GPT-3 has irony and sarcasm? And where do we make the differentiation between the corpus and the AI?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I see what you're saying, and that's quite interesting. So what do you think the implications would be of this? Excuse me, my voice is slightly better today. But what would the implications of this be for, say, transhumanism? Would you consider yourself?
I would say that I am within the transhumanist field with my line of thought. So the implication depends on who you are asking. Me personally, I believe that it means we can have robots that can do a lot of the interactions at human level capacity that humans do not necessarily want a human to do. So this is one of the things that I am considering within the conclusion. Yes, we will have AI that will be able to do, I don't know, maybe psychological counseling, philosophical counseling, maybe interact with you in a spiritual healing kind of way, you know. But do you want it to be with a silicon-based being? So I'm seeing that where the differentiation will emerge is maybe at what is profoundly human. And that what is profoundly human will become more meaningful within us and get more strongly expressed, while everything that we consider less human, we will hand it over to something that can simulate us to a degree where it's sufficient.
Yeah,
Excuse me, I just thought I'd ask a follow-up here. So you're saying that the silicon-based form, life form, if you can call it, the silicon-based entity, could not show unconditional regard. It wouldn't even understand that. It wouldn't have the ability.
I don't know. I need to honestly answer this with a big I don't know.
But if considering that, you know, what its limitations would be for its role in.
So as long as you have the zombie hypothesis, it might mimic it perfectly. It might be able to put you into a state where you feel unconditional regard, but that might still mean that it doesn't feel it towards you, that it doesn't have it towards you. It's just a simulacrum.
It reminds me of that movie, I don't know if you ever saw it, called Her.
Yeah.
I know, and AI has seen that. So, so where she could mimic, you know, great love, attraction, you know, and so forth. But so I wanted to know your thoughts on it in terms of, you know, so you're saying that in itself, it wouldn't be adequate. Is that it?
I'm saying that based on the hypotheses that we currently have, it is impossible to state whether it would or would not be accurate, just because the possibility would remain that it is just a simulacrum and not real, and that it seems right now impossible to make an experiment in which it could prove that it is real and not a simulacrum. Hence, we will always make it inadequate, even if it could be adequate, maybe just because of our epistemological limitations.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great presentation, really great questions. It's time for us to move on. I'm sorry, there's a lot more questions, but we have to move on.
I'm going to drop my email, my contact in the chat, so if anybody wants to further discuss this, I'm available to answer.
That's a great idea.
Engage.
All right. We're starting a new session. Our first speaker today in this session is Carol Gould. Her title is LBT and Self-Knowledge. As a bio, she's a professor of philosophy at Florida Atlantic University, soon to be Emerita, in Boca Raton, Florida. Her specialization